to it, they do it because. So if he ever puts it in the market, it's going to be a one of one.
Good afternoon. We're back in session, and we'll begin the afternoon with the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair the ES&P Educator Preparation Programs and Practice Committee, subcommittee of the board. And joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. The first three items can be categorized as falling or being affected by GS 115C 269.10, and the policy pursuant to that general statute is TC, Teacher Education 003. So we have one, the first item is an action on first reading. The next item is, the next two items are action items. We have taken those two items up in previous meetings. I'm going to ask Dr. Jordan to come forward, and he's already forward. There he is, ready to go, to just quickly take us through the first three items.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine, Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, members of the board, advisors. Good afternoon. As Dr. Oxendine indicated, ES&P 1 is coming to you, action on first read, and you will recall we discussed the first tranche of community college EPP applications last month, and the reason this particular group is coming to you action on first read is because you've now been through the process, and the community college system is asking for us to consider approvals, subsequent approvals via action on first read to help them facilitate hiring and program planning. And so this group includes Brunswick, Catawba Valley, Davidson, Davie, Durham Technical, Forsyth Technical, Johnston, Lenoir, Richmond, Sampson, Stanley, and Wake Technical. They are all coming to you as requests for approval of their EPP applications. These applications have been approved by the Community College Board, and they adhere to the state board's framework, which you approved previously, for course offerings and program requirements. There are 11 of them. 9 are requesting approval for the fall 2023 semester, and 2 are requesting approval for fall 2024. As a reminder, these programs would only offer a path to licensure. They will not be degree granting programs, and so that means that only those who already possess an undergraduate degree would be eligible. They will have the same reporting and accountability certification for each community college as all other approved EPPs. The framework that you approved, as well as the institutional certification for each community college, are included in your board materials. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions about the first item? Then we'll go on to the second item, which is that previous is action on first read. We have 2 action items coming up.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. This item, as you indicated, was presented for discussion last month and is before you today for action. These 5 community colleges comprise the first group seeking approval under the state's framework for community colleges: Alamance, Central Piedmont, Fayetteville Technical, McDowell Technical, and Western Piedmont. All 5 are seeking approval to begin fall 2023. These applications have also been approved by the Community College Board and adhere to the state board approved framework. As a reminder, they too would only be offering a path to licensure for those who currently hold an undergraduate degree, and they would be subject to the same reporting and accountability obligations as the other approved EPPs.
Any questions about item 2? If not, we will go to item 3, which is not a community college, it's a school district, but it is still making the request under the same provisions.
Thank you. This item was also presented for discussion last month and is before you for action today. Winston-Salem Forsyth's plan was reviewed by the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation and found to be developing or ready in all required areas. They are also seeking to begin fall 2023 with a total of 11 core areas and 6 CTE areas, and they plan to implement birth to kindergarten next year. This particular program, like the others, would also be subject to the same reporting and accountability obligations as other approved EPPs.
Very good. Any questions? All right, so that takes care of our community colleges and our LEA that wishes to be initially authorized to provide, to become a pathway for educator providers. That is, rather teachers, I should say, not educators in general. So we will, let me pause and just give you a heads up. This might come in useful down the road, but I have been approached in my community by 2 individuals. There seems to be this, and this will help us clarify what is happening with our community colleges, adding on a program or a pipeline to prepare teachers. There seems to be a little bit of confusion in my area, I should say, not across the state, but and I'll just make you aware of it. They're beginning to see the community colleges, or they're hearing, or they're drawing the conclusion that they're now becoming 4-year schools training teachers. So just a bit of clarifying communication that we probably need to, just file it away, and if that comes to your attention when you're out in the community or talking to other educators, to clarify that. I can kind of see how that might occur, but it's a matter of clarity around what this policy is all about and what this framework actually provides. It's just like, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Superintendent.
Excuse me. For the past 10 years, there have been community colleges who perhaps were investigating in North Carolina the idea of being able to grant 4-year degrees in areas where we needed more workforce, particularly nursing. In nursing is what I recall about a decade ago. But that never came to fruition. And now what we have is simply the ability of community colleges to license those who already have a 4-year degree by providing them with a residency license. They're still not none of the community colleges that we have approved to offer these licenses are granting 4-year degrees.
Right. That's exactly, we know that. I think the way I'm keeping it simple without going into a lot of nuance with citizens, the 2 that have came to my attention, is just saying that these institutions, these community colleges, are adding a program to their existing program. It's not that they're becoming 4-year schools, or it's not that they are full-fledged preparing teachers. They're adding a program to their curriculum of programs. So that kind of keeps it, because you don't want to go too far in the weeds in discussing it, but just wanted to draw that to your attention. The next item is ES&P 4, and this pertains to changes in the Career and Technical Education Licensure Policies and Procedures Manual. This item was presented last month to us by Ms. O'Neill, and she is going to just give us a very brief update of any changes or information that she wishes to share pursuant to this item.
Thank you. Just a reminder, this policy governs initial CTE restricted license and support services license in CTE areas. The revisions that we're asking you to approve today have come from the field, and we've received extensive feedback over the past couple of years. We haven't had any revisions since 21, so I'm happy to answer any questions or anything that you need at this time.
Any questions? Thank you, Ms. O'Neill.
Thanks.
And the last item, I think I'm doing this in about 5 minutes. How about that? Let me keep talking. So ES&P 5, which is the last item on my portion of the agenda, is transforming educator learning in North Carolina, realizing the potential of micro-credentials. This coming to us this month is just a request that we approve the report that was presented to us last month by Ms. Myra Best. Also presenting with her was Dr. Tom Tomberlin and Dr. Ashley McBride. Those are our DPI folks who serve on a task force with Ms. Best. Also presenting last month was Dr. Barnett Berry and Dr. Bill McDermott. So this initiative really is going to nicely complement the Pathways to Excellence, and it will also certainly complement the work we're doing around the advanced teacher roles. A little bit of added information is that some work is currently being done by the task force, and I would add that Dr. Tomberlin, Drs. Tomberlin and Dr. McBride serve on this task force. They're going to be considering, or perhaps finalizing, not considering, but finalizing some quality assurance measures. That would be the tools needed to determine the quality of micro-credentials. So that information will go to Pepsi first before it comes to the state board, and that will be future meetings coming our way. And also there was some discussion last month about the possibility of creating some kind of exemplars or models of what is a micro-credential, what would be some possibilities that teachers could consider. The additive to the micro-credential work is that it certainly will enhance what we know as the continuing education units, the CEUs that educators must pursue every 5 years. So micro-credentials could come in play to enhance and fortify and strengthen that policy that's been in place for many years in North Carolina. So that concludes my report, unless you have questions about anything that I presented in about 6 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Appreciate your leadership on the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. We'll now turn to business operations and Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Along with my good friend Wendell Hall, we lead the Business Operations Committee, and we have several items for this meeting. I'm going to try to save some time for next meeting. We had originally on Biz Op 1, which is our first action on first read item, a contract amendment for Amplify Education. That's not coming forward now because DIT is still doing some further review before approval. But in any event, I'm seeking to find, if there's no objections by the board, this particular contract's a configuration change that would add a 4th benchmark to the M class with Dibbles, 8 assessments to accommodate the Read to Achieve summer reading camps. So that would create alignment with beginning of year, middle of year, and end of the year assessment. It is really a no additional cost contract. It's a matter of reconfiguring the existing contract, which is for over $500,000. It's reconfiguring this in a way that for no additional money allows us to move forward with this work. So unless there's any objections, I would suggest that when DIT approves it, we allow the department to just proceed to execute the contract and move forward. No dollars are involved. Otherwise, we can bring it back when DIT finally approves it, which I'd rather not hold the department up in this instance. So let me look. Are there any objections to moving forward in that way?
Yeah, Vice Chair Duncan, we just let the record reflect that that is the action that the board's considering under
All right.
Biz Op 1.
Very good.
And then consider it in our action agenda.
Very good. Biz Op 1, the second item is a contract amendment for teaching strategies. It's the Office of Early Learning, and Dan Tetros here to present that. He did a 1-minute drill in our practice, so I know this will be good.
Try to keep it to 45 seconds. So this is for teaching strategies, which provides the state's kindergarten entry assessment, also known as the North Carolina Early Learning Inventory. This is the final, we're exercising the final option, the final optional year. The total amount of this amendment is a little more than 100,000 less than the previous amendment. We lowered the number of student portfolios that we need for the coming year slightly, and then we no longer need the training, the additional training for staff. They're fully trained now.
Any questions on this? All right, not hearing any, thank you very much. That concludes Biz Op 1, our action on first read, and our second action on first read item is Biz Op 2. This is the 21st Century Community Learning Center fiscal year 23 competitive summer mini grant recommendations. We have gone through this process multiple times. Susan Brigman is here to present.
Yes.
What
And I'm
we
going to
have
keep it short and sweet
forward.
too. As always, this is funding that is authorized under Title IV Part B of ESSA. And this summer, we are recommending approximately $6 million in funding for applications. And this is a one-time summer funding opportunity for folks around the state. Pretty much anybody, as with our traditional competition, is eligible to apply for these funds. So that includes your LEAs, which are your districts and your charters, community-based, city or county government, faith-based organizations, institutions of higher learning, nonprofit and for-profit corporations. For FY23, our summer program focus is to improve students' access to innovative learning strategies in order to achieve grade level proficiency, and that we also want enrichment and academic activities to be multidisciplinary in approach, be broad in offering, and help students build connections between their academic skills, knowledge, and the students' cultural and community context. The funding ranges remain the same as they have for the past 2 years. We are requiring a minimum of 50 students to be served for at least 4 weeks. But the ranges that you see on the screen will basically show you if you apply for a certain amount of students for a certain amount of weeks, that is the funding range that you may be eligible for. We had several priority points assigned to this summer mini grant. If you were in an economically distressed county, you could earn 2 points for Tier 1, 1 for Tier 2, or 0 for Tier 3. We also wanted programs to focus on serving students in CSI and TSI schools. So if you propose to serve 100% of students identified in both of those categories, then you would, in just CSI, you would get 2 points, but if you do both, we would also give you a point if you're serving a combination. Extended program hours was also an area where folks could earn up to 4 points, offering services before 9 a.m., after 5 p.m., even on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. We also wanted to make sure that we continue to spread the funding across the state and make sure that everybody has access to these opportunities. So if you propose to run a 21st Century Summer Mini Grant program and you did not currently have 21st Century funding, meaning you're not a current grantee, then you would receive 5 points for that. Or if you propose to operate in a county in which there was not a grant there for the past 3 cycles. So we are going to recommend at least a minimum of 2 per State Board of Education region, as long as there are applicants that meet the quality bands. And so on the next slide, you'll see we did have, you can go ahead to the next one. You can see that we did have at least 2 applicants from 7 of the 8. We received them from regions 1 through 6 and 8. So we did not receive any applications for region 7. These applicants, we have to screen those to start with to make sure they're in good standing with us if they currently have a grant or have had one in the past. And they do have to meet one of the top 3 quality bands, which you can see those ranges there: excellent, strong, and average. So this slide, the next slide will show you a table. It breaks down how many applications we received per region and how many we were able to fund per region, for a total of about $6 million for this summer. And then on the next slide, you will see the actual programs, the names of the organizations, and their amounts that they will be receiving to show you what that total of $6 million is coming from. On the next slide, you'll be able to see not very many that we did not fund. Out of the 47 we received, we actually did fund 32 of them, which is a significant number for summer. But these are the ones that were not able to be funded.
And just have two other quick slides I want to share with you, just to show you that the priority points do make an impact. We do have several new grantees for the summer, which is great, because those are areas where there was not a program. So we have quite a few there. It's over half of what we are allocating. So $3.8 million, $3.6 million is actually going to new programs. And then we also picked up a few other underserved counties. So if there hadn't been a program in a county for the past 3 cycles, we were able to pick up several new programs there too. Okay, and that's it. You have any questions?
Very good. Any questions, comments? Really appreciate the work you and your colleagues have done to make sure there's equity and making all parts of the state have opportunities for these grants, and very appreciative of the work that you're doing in that regard.
Thank you.
All right, our next item, Biz Op 3, was a discussion item last month. It's the report to the legislature about supplemental funds for teacher compensation. We were taking it off the agenda. It was to be an action item. There's still work being done on that in terms of identifying any supplanting of supplemental funds. It's very complicated in terms of interpretation of language that's in the statute. And the districts have, there's still communications going on between the districts and Ms. Schaus's office, and so for that reason, we're going to continue to work through those issues and ask for some additional time to the legislature so we can bring this back to you as soon as we've got further work done on it. That would bring us then to Biz Op 4, which is a discussion item, and it is going to be presented by Timothy Dryman, who's with the federal programs. And this is an item, and Dr. Townsend is also here. Welcome, both of you. This is an item that goes back to some federal legislation last year, and it resulted in a grant to North Carolina of approximately $29 million. And we have had an allotment policy that came, a little bit out of order, came to us in March. We're not used to it coming in that time. This time sequencing is a little different than normal. But there was an allotment policy that came through earlier, and now this is the grant proposal and how to handle the grant distributions that we now have before us for discussion today. Dr. Townsend.
Good afternoon. I wanted to be here with you today to give an overview before we get started. I am joined by Mr. Tim Dryman. He actually serves as the Consolidated Program Administrator in the Southwest. So this is his home region. With our consolidated program administrators, they each have a secondary or a specialty. And so Mr. Dryman's specialty is Title IV. And so when this grant came down the pike, we could think of no better person to help us lead the effort with this particular grant. So he is going to begin by telling you a little bit about the grant, and then I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about how we came to determine what our definition would be for high needs in North Carolina, and give you just a little bit more information about that was shared in the allotment policy, and then I will pass the baton back to Mr. Dryman. So take it away.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you. As you know, last year, President Biden signed into law the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act in June of 2022, and this was in response to the ongoing gun violence, recurring gun violence across the country. Out of those funds, the Department of Education was awarded $1 billion to be used to address the issue of gun violence across the country. North Carolina would like to use those funds under the North Carolina Strong Connections Grant. In keeping in guidance with a Dear Colleague letter signed by Secretary Cardona, these are the 3 areas that the department would like the funds to be focused on. The first one is addressing social emotional needs. The second one is to bring in communities and families to address violence in the communities. And the third one is to address equity and inclusivity within the high needs communities. We feel, based on data, that addressing these root causes that lead to gun violence and other types of violence would diminish gun violence and other types of violence in high needs communities.
And so I wanted to provide just a little bit of insight. So the U.S. Department of Education provided us with very clear guidelines as to how we would move forward. And so they actually gave information to help create this definition, and it really kept speaking about the neediest school districts. And so within their guidance, there was the first portion, which is basically saying that you have to look at communities that are in high rates of poverty. So they actually ask you to look at the community that's in high poverty, and then also the number of schools that have high percentages of students that are in poverty. So looking at the overall community, but then also looking within the school. So after poverty was established as a baseline, then there were other criteria that states could actually utilize to form their definition. And so one of those is looking at the numbers or the ratios related to mental health clinicians, looking at things such as chronic absenteeism, exclusionary discipline policies, referrals to DJJ, bullying, harassment instances, overall school violence, and then also within North Carolina, locations where students might have experienced a natural disaster. But we don't have one really recently. So that didn't really resound with me. So one of the things that we started to do was to think about what kinds of data sources are available within the agency. Who could we partner with across the agency? And so one of the things that we looked at really was those ratios. And so each year there's a report that's presented that actually provides those numbers. And so that has come before the board. So that was something that was definitely on our minds. We also revisited some of our work with the Healthy Schools area. So Title IV funds are actually used to fund their youth risk behavior survey. And so we wanted to really kind of parlay on that relationship. We also had some conversations with our colleague Angel Goodwine-Batts over in Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems. And so she and her team, they help school districts really more formally build out the MTSS model. So we began having these conversations, and we actually came up with our North Carolina specific criteria. And so our North Carolina specific criteria, in keeping with students living in poverty, we began looking at Tier 1 counties as reflected with the Department of Commerce, as well as Title I, so then now reflecting with high numbers of students in poverty within schools. Then we actually pulled information about those ratios. And so the ratios that were provided, those were best practices. And so as we know in North Carolina, we blow these ratios out of the water. We far exceed those in most cases. And then the last one was utilizing information based on an assessment using the whole school, whole community, whole child model. And this board did actually put that model into effect in 2016. And so trying to make sure that we could utilize information that was at our fingertips that school districts could actually utilize. And so that is how we came to this particular definition. And as Vice Chair Duncan did state, that allotment policy did come to you at the March meeting. And this definition was a part of that allotment policy. And so in keeping with poverty, so that you have a good idea of where those counties are, those counties, those most 40 distressed counties are listed on the screen. And it wouldn't just be the county, it would be any PSU, whether it's a LEA, a charter, or a state-operated program that has a physical address within one of those 40 counties. That gets us to 93 counties. And so that is our definition, and then I'm going to pass it back to Mr. Dryman, who will give you some information about sample programs and tell you a little bit more about what we're recommending for funding.
Thank you. So some of the sample programs that we would like to implement, working with the Integrated Academic Behavior Systems MTS team, would be, as you see here, working to enhance the MTSS model, providing implementation of good PD for the MTSS model in those counties, and also providing additional staff to address those needs, as you saw with those ratios. And also the big piece here is to engage the community as well. We feel that the community and bringing families in plays a big part in reducing those violent acts. So as you can see here, the funding availability, the state of North Carolina received just under 29.8 million from the federal government. And after the state set aside of 1% for administrating the grant and 4% for technical assistance at the state level, this is the amount of funds that will go out to awarded PSUs. The grant will be available, these funds will be available in the 23-24, 24-25, and 25-26 school years. All funds will be encumbered by September 30th of 2026. Each awarded PSU will receive a grant of no more than $675,000. And you can see the formula there. It's $250 base, $1,500 per ADM, which is $500 per year of the grant. And based on that, the amount has to match the amount of the ADM that is put into the eligible school summary report in Power School.
All right, not hearing any. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
This will come back as an action item.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That brings us into two consent items, both of which we've heard about before. BizOp 5 is the Remote Academies hardware and software fees. BizOp 6 is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly about supplanting of low wealth or small county supplemental funds, of which we have a happy report that there is no supplanting on those. I see Melissa Davis up. There's anything you would like to add to BizOp 5? Please.
Good afternoon. So State Law 2022-59 provides for remote academies and LEAs beginning with the 23-24 school year to implement the statute and permit local school administrative units to charge students in remote academies fees. We've proposed the rule that provides definitions for damage fees and rental fees. To remain in compliance with the rulemaking process, we are beginning the steps for establishing a permanent rule to be in effect October 1st.
Thank you. So that would complete our items to vote on, BizOp 6 being the report that we previously heard about last month. On updates to contracts report, on one executed contract, I just want to make mention of it. We in years past, several years past, had an issue arise about Apple computers being used and how they're being used. We actually have a use for this that's on this month's report, and it's for the EC department is using a bulk order in order to facilitate services for our EC students. So that's a thing I did want to highlight, just because sometimes there have been questions asked about that in the past. And on our planned contracts report, there are 3 contracts with Invo Healthcare Services. These contracts are all for providing services at the Governor Moorhead School. In total, they are more than our $500,000 amount. They're broken out because they're for different kinds of healthcare services, so they won't come to us separately in that regard. They could have been written theoretically all together, but they're separate for each of the services. They're substantial and important contracts for our students there for the services that are provided, and they are in fine order and ready to go. But I just wanted to, because it's a little bit unusual to have them broken out for the same vendor, just point that out for the board. And with that, unless there are any questions on any of those things, that completes the report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. We've now come to the last item on our agenda, which is where we'll vote on any items requiring action from your reports. A discussion and report was provided on each item, including consent agenda. And I remind my colleagues that consent agenda is primarily not complex items and have come before the board in previous months. Also note that we've seen these consent agenda items for about a week. So in organizing our items to vote, we will vote separately on EICS 1 and 4. Is the request to remove any other items from the consent action on first reading agendas for separate vote? Ms. Kamnitz. Let the record reflect that Ms. Kamnitz is recusing herself from BizOp 2. Any other comments? Okay. So at this time, I request a motion to approve the following: our meeting minutes for the April 5 and 6, 2023 State Board of Education, SLA 1 and 2, EICS 2 and 3, ES&P 1 through 5, and BizOp 3 and 5, 1 through 2, and 5 and 6, and then the limited license and initial professional license recommendations that we discussed in closed session last evening. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Motion by the treasurer. Is there a second? Second by Dr. Ford. Any discussion on this motion? Dr. Petrie Martin, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Dr. Oxendine. Yes. Mrs. Kamnitz. Yes. Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White. Yes. Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. The motion carries. Next item we will consider is EICS 1. And Ms. White, could you remind us what the recommendation before us is on EICS 1, please?
EICS 1 is the recommendation for North Carolina Virtual Academy to expand its enrollment.
Okay. So that's the recommendation before us. Is there a motion on that recommendation?
Move approval.
Ms. White moves approval. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion on this motion? Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine. Yes. Mrs. Kamnitz. No. Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
No.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
No.
Chair Davis.
No. The motion carries 5-4. Next up is EICS 4, and I'd suggest that we take these one school at a time. So, first up is Next Gen. And could you turn on your mic?
I have
Oh,
done
you
so.
have.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Do you want me to sing?
Actually, I bet you could. And we'd enjoy it.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so there are 5 total schools. Let's break this down, each one separately. So you have before you a motion to approve let me get back to that exactly. So I will move approval for a 10-year renewal for Langtree Charter.
Okay, motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Oxendine. Any discussion on the motion to approve Langtree Charter for a 10-year renewal? Hearing none, Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz. Yes. Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
No.
Chair Davis.
No. Motion carries 7-2. Ms. White.
I move approval for Westlake Preparatory Academy for a 7-year.
Motion by Ms. White for the 7-year renewal of Westlake. Is there a second? Second by Dr. Oxendine. Any discussion? Dr. Petrie Martin.
Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz. Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
No.
Chair Davis.
No. Motion carries 7-2. Cabarrus. Ms. White.
I move approval for Cabarrus Charter Academy to have a 3-year renewal.
Motion by Ms. White for a 3-year renewal of Cabarrus Charter. Is there a second? Second by Dr. Oxendine. Any discussion? Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz. Mr. Keenan.
No.
Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell.
Aye.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
No.
Chair Davis.
No. Motion carries 6-3. Next up is the Next Gen.
So I move approval for Next Generation Academy for a 3-year renewal with the following stipulations. Quarterly financial academic report to OCS and CSAB in 1 year. Required federal training, including attending a 21st Century Community Learning Grant, May and September 1st report of payments that are due to be repaid, and presentations by the school to CSAB quarterly.
Motion by Ms. White to approve a 3-year renewal with stipulations for Next Gen. Second?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Petrie, any discussion? Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz.
Yes.
Mr. Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Hull. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
No.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
No.
Chair Davis.
No. Motion carries 6-3. Invest Collegiate. Ms. White.
So our final recommendation for the day will be to approve the CSAB
recommendation that we, and our previous vote, that we not renew Invest Collegiate Transform's charter for the reasons previously articulated today and entered into the record.
Motion by Ms. White to approve the recommendation to not renew Invest Collegiate. Is there a second?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine. Any discussion?
Point of clarification,
Dr. Ford?
to vote in the affirmative is to not renew, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
Any other discussion? Dr. Petrie Martin?
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz. Yes. Mr. Keenan.
Yes. Approved.
Mr. Hall. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White.
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries 9-0. Colleagues, that concludes our action agenda. Before we close, would like to turn to my colleague, Ms. White, for a moment of personal privilege. Ms. White.
Thank you so much, Chair Davis. I did ask the chair to have a moment to just read a statement into the record today. So in June of 2016, Governor Pat McCrory appointed me to a 7-year term on service to serve on the State Board of Education. It has been one of the highlights of my 30-year career of advocacy for students and families across the state of North Carolina. What an honor it was to receive that phone call. While I could continue to serve in this position until Governor Cooper's newest appointee is confirmed by both houses of the General Assembly, I have made the decision to announce today my retirement of service to the board to refocus my passion, my energy, and my time on the Christian ministry that I lead, Community of Hope Ministries. Community of Hope is a strong partner with all of the public schools in Garner, North Carolina, and our efforts as a Christian nonprofit are directly aligned with the work that our amazing superintendent, our incredible staff here at DPI, and this board are committed to lead and to continue for best possible outcomes for students. While I will not be sitting at this table, my heart and my hands will be hard at work in Southern Wake County, serving alongside you with, as I often say, boots on the ground and eyes on the prize, eliminating barriers to success for families and students at home, at work, at school, and in the community. I have enjoyed my time serving alongside you. My last board meeting representing the North Central region will be June the 1st, 2023. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, Ms. White, let me just say that's a stunner. We were not expecting that, and yet many of us can share the feelings that you just expressed on the rewards and challenges of serving on this board. But let me just say personally, you are a marvelous board member. You were on the Wake County Local Board. You have been here. You are singularly focused on students, and I personally learned a lot from you. So I'm sure as the June meeting comes, we'll all want to express our appreciation and thankfulness to you. So I'll do that at this time, and then we'll look forward to celebrating you come the June meeting. Okay. Thank you. All right, colleagues, and those who worked so diligently to prepare this meeting, thank you so much for a successful 3-day meeting. At this time, I'll call on a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by the treasurer. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Dr. Petrie Martin.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes.
Mrs. Kamnitz.
Yes.
Mr. Keenan. Mr. Hall. Dr. Tipton Rogers. Mrs. White. Mr. Blackburn. Dr. Ford.
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson. Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Stand adjourned.